To another episode of the Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished entrepreneur, a fellow member of the YPO from Mexico, Laila Leonida. Laila, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Laila is a soul connection facilitator. She's the founder of Soul Space, which is tapped into spiritual practices through the lens of meditation, yoga, tantra, and bhakti. And as I mentioned, she's a fellow YPO. So, Laila, before we start talking about Soul Space, tell me a little bit about yourself and what got you started on this spiritual journey.
Yeah, so I was actually atheist for quite some time, and I was hardcore atheist. I thought everything spiritual and religious was laughable, and I could not have imagined myself turning around at any point. And as is often the case with people like me, we need to suffer something really difficult in order to turn around. And for me, that started with a really heartbreaking divorce. And that sent me out on a search for truth, which transformed into like a desire to just be free from all fear. And I had no idea where it was going to take me. And one thing led to another. And now I'm just turned around 180 degrees. My spiritual practice is the main priority in my life.
Wow.
And I'm so grateful for the turn of events.
Amazing. So let's talk about Soul Space. What drew you to meditation, yoga, tantra, and bhakti as a part of your spiritual practice?
Yeah, so for me, it started actually with plant medicines. So I don't know if you've heard about ayahuasca. It's a brew from the Amazonian jungle, which kind of like was the thing that popped my atheism. And I knew that I could never come back after that. And so that kind of when we start walking this path, it's like one thing leads to another. Like you take one step and then the next step reveals itself. And so from there, I became drawn to meditation because I knew that I needed to keep that connection somehow. I'm not going to have ayahuasca every day, so how am I going to live my life in a higher state of consciousness? And so I started with meditation, and I got into transcendental meditation and vipassana, and that really became my path. It's such a profound and beautiful practice, the vipassana teachings. Then that led me into yoga. And I met a tantric master, and I went really deep with these practices. I've been so blessed. I've met these living masters. I was training with a yogi who lives in the Himalayan foothills. He's an absolute genius. And so I've been having this fortune to meet really elevated souls who could really propel me on my path.
How amazing. How amazing. And how does yoga, let me start by yoga first. How does yoga contribute to spiritual growth and self-awareness?
Yeah, so yoga is a complete system, right? So many people, when they think of yoga, they think of these acrobatic positions that people post on Instagram, right? But yoga encompasses all of the spiritual practices. So it includes meditation, it includes breath work, it includes Himalayan Kundalini, working with mantra, devotional practices, and there's a lot of scripture, right? So it's a complete technology. And the beauty of that is that yoga can meet anyone exactly where they are. So if an atheist comes to yoga, they can take the stretches and they can take the meditation. Most people can accept these practices and they can experience the benefit quite immediately. And then as one practices, what is kind of maybe a little bit more hidden is that it's also a purification process that is starting. So there is a purification of the mind, of the consciousness, as soon as we start these practices, which opens the mind. And so then we become more open to experience more of what the technology has to offer.
Right. Fascinating. Fascinating. And also tell us about the role of meditation in finding clarity and inner peace.
Yeah, it's essential, really, because if you, as anyone who has just observed the mind a little bit, will find that the mind is doing one of two things, right? It's either in the future or it's in the past. And in those places, it's also doing one of two things. It's either liking or it's disliking. And the mind goes on like this all day long, bouncing back and forth, future, past, liking, disliking, liking, disliking. And you will see that you can start a train of thought and another thought comes. It doesn't even finish the previous thought before something else comes. Right. And it's a total madhouse. And so meditation is the practice of concentrating the mind, focusing the mind. And that, with practice, will start to create more peace and more silence. And as side effects of that, more intelligence, more trust, a better life experience. So highly recommend meditation practices.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. And how would you, Laila, define happiness in the context of spiritual growth and personal development?
Yeah, happiness is our true nature, right? This is our default state, really. But most of us don't experience life that way because that happiness is covered by so many things like stress, anxiety, depression, greed, anger, lust, guilt, shame, like so many things, right, that are covering that happiness. So we don't really get to experience it. And then we have these fleeting moments of happiness that we call happiness, which is when we achieve something or we acquire something that we've been wanting. But that happiness is fleeting. It doesn't last.
Right.
And so the real happiness is permanent, and it doesn't need an external reason to exist. It's always there. And so the spiritual practices, it's like we're starting with a teaspoon and we're spooning out from this mountain of negativity that is covering our happiness. And the more we can take out of that, the more we get to experience that real happiness.
What a great example. Thank you. We've spoken about meditation. We've spoken about yoga a little bit. I want to ask you now about tantra. What distinguishes tantra from other spiritual practices, and how can it benefit individuals?
Yeah, tantra is an interesting topic because many people, when they hear tantra, they think of sex. Because there are different branches of tantra, right? And some of the branches are using sexual practices as a spiritual practice. And what that means is that they are cultivating the divine in each other as a couple.
Correct.
In their spiritual practice. And then there's neo-tantric practices, which are very popular in the West, where there's a lot of communication practices related to trust and emotional intimacy that are embedded into the sexual tantric practices. Now, what I've been studying is not that branch of tantra. I was in the more traditional tantric practices, which are extremely devotional. It's pure devotion. The goal of that practice is to love God all day, all the time, embracing God as everything that is happening, everything that I meet, everything I experience is God, and to be in love with God is cultivation of that. And so there are many rituals and scriptures and mantras that are supporting the cultivation of that. So it's very beautiful for cultivating devotion.
Well said, well said. And let's talk now about bhakti. How does bhakti help individuals deepen their connection with themselves and the divine?
Yeah, bhakti is also pure devotion. And what distinguishes bhakti is that it is very like we sing, right? We sing kirtan and we sing mantras. We dance. We eat amazing food that has been cooked and has been offered first to the Lord, and so the food has become spiritualized. And then there's a lot of scripture and emphasis on what's called sadhu sangha, which is to the association of saints, is also very important in bhakti. And so in many ways, it is the easiest path, if you will, for our day and age. So we live in what is called Kali Yuga, which is the era of hypocrisy and quarrels and misunderstanding and over-information. And so for this age, the recommended and easiest way to practice is bhakti, because really you only need to chant a mantra to receive benefit. And it is done in such a joyful way. There are endless beautiful melodies, and it becomes this ecstatic trance as we're chanting congregationally, together as a group with beautiful instruments. And yeah, it's kind of, when I first came to bhakti, I just fell in love. I had never heard anything so beautiful, and the ecstasy was just instant, and I was like, wow. And then I realized that is like the essence of the teaching, and again I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Well said.
So there's
there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn from our scriptures, of Sanatan Dharma. But Laila, you were telling me before you started off on this journey, you were an atheist, and now I can see you're a complete believer. What advice would you give to someone who struggles with cultivating devotion or a connection with the divine?
Yeah, so if someone struggles to cultivate a devotion, the first thing I would bring their attention to is the sincerity in their heart. So how sincere are you in your desire to connect with the divine? Are you, while you're in your practice, whatever it may be, thinking about what you're going to do later or cook for dinner? How important is it in your heart? Is it something that you have been told that you need to do? Are you coming from a place of fear? Like, what is it? That would be my first thing, to connect to the sincerity. Because once we have a sincere desire, God provide ample opportunities for us to connect.
Right.
Now, the other thing that is incredibly beneficial is to seek a spiritual master, someone who is expert in the spiritual tradition that you're practicing within, or that you feel drawn to. Because a spiritual master has gone the complete path that you're about to walk, and can show you exactly where you walk, so you don't have to take all the detours.
Right.
And they help us with things like doubts and hesitation and all these little enemies of the mind. So having a spiritual master is really like taking the elevator in comparison to working on your own.
What a great response. Thank you. And, when you talk about, people who are wanting to go down the path of bhakti, or talking to go down the path towards the divine, based on your own experience with so many different people, what are some challenges or obstacles that people face?
Yeah, the most common one is distractions, being too busy. This idea that I don't have the time is very common. When it comes to meditation, many people think, oh, I can't do it. I just can't do it. But this, I don't have time, and the enemy of doubt, to try something but not give it a full effort, and then conclude, oh, it's not working for me. So we have to choose one path, choose one tradition, and give it your 100%. And that means to have a daily practice, a consistent daily practice. And how long that is, that will be up to the practitioner. But without a daily practice, it's just going to become more and more difficult to sustain it. And this thing about time is that when we create, we decide with a strong determination, I'm going to carve out 20 minutes, whatever it is, in my day to do my practice. Then it's kind of like the universe, whatever people want to call it, some people call it God, the universe, spirit, creates space for us. So when we decide to do it, we will always have time to do it. And if we make some effort, like maybe it means, okay, maybe I have to get up earlier in the morning, that is just paying off, and it comes back as the blossoming of the practice. And also, if we look at the day in most people's life, there are so many things that we can easily cut to create space for spiritual practice. For example, watching TV, scrolling on social media. There are many ways that we're kind of like wasting our time a little bit. So we do have time.
Correct. Well said. And how does the concept of self-love and self-compassion tie into our spiritual development?
Yeah, so actually my yoga teacher, he literally says that most of us were walking around in a state of perpetual self-hatred. And we don't recognize it as such, right? But when someone who is standing on a more elevated platform can see that that is what we're doing to ourselves, because when we consider the fact that our truth is bliss, it's gratitude, it's like this the loving experience, trusting experience of life, and we walk around in this like anxiety and fear and protecting ourselves, then that is kind of a form of self-hatred. Now, how does this transform into self-love? Well, the first one is that a spiritual practice is an act of self-care, right? When I show up to practice, I take care of myself, and I demonstrate to myself that I'm taking care of myself. And so this is, on the subconscious level, increasing my self-worth. And the other thing is that when you take care of anything, right, whether it is a plant or an animal or a child, you start loving the thing that you take care of. So when we take care of ourselves, we start to love ourselves more as well, just as a consequence of the act of taking care of.
Very interesting.
And yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And when it comes to when it comes to self-compassion, so the opposite of compassion is judgment, right? And we are our own strictest, harshest judge.
Correct.
And when I judge myself, I will also judge others. When I judge others, I will judge myself. And so the spiritual practices are cultivating our capabilities of patience, tolerance, of trust. Like even just in meditation, every time the mind wanders, we bring it back. But we kind of have to bring it back with patience. Because if we bring it back with anger, we're kind of working against the goal of the practice. So we're cultivating that ability to be patient and tolerant with ourselves through the practices. And so over time, that results in compassion, both for ourselves and for others. They always go hand in hand.
Wow, thank you. And Laila, what role does the community and support play in one's journey towards the divine?
Oh, it's so important. Yeah. The importance of having like-minded people in your life who believe the same thing that you believe is crucial, because whenever you are around other people who either believe something else, or maybe they're atheists, they believe something completely different, and everywhere we go in the world, we're bombarded with messages. And so all of that is a very powerful force to create doubt in our own mind. And doubt is number one enemy of a spiritual practice. So if you have one tiny strain of faith, you need to protect it. It's your treasure. It's the most important thing that you have. And so that little strain can become like more solid, more strong. When we are in spiritual community, that grows, it gets nourishment, we get validation of what we believe, and we're around people who support and nourish the faith in ourselves. It's really important.
And what are your thoughts on the intersection between science and spirituality, and how can they coexist or complement one another?
Yeah, they can definitely coexist. I don't think there's any opposition between science and spirituality. I see it now, and it's kind of funny thinking that I was atheist before and science was the only thing that I would consider. But how I see it now is that science is looking through the world, looking at the world through like a little hole, right? This is what they can see, because everything that they are going to see has to pass through scientific method and a number of experiments and peer reviews and all these things to be accepted. So it's a very slow process. So probably piece by piece, they will expand that little hole that they're seeing through until maybe ultimately, maybe, who knows, they will see the big picture. But with spirituality, you can see the big picture right away. You don't need to limit yourself to see only these things that have been like approved by the scientific method.
Correct.
Yeah. And then we see mostly that when science within the different fields, as it progresses, it kind of arrives at the same truths that spirituality has been presenting the whole time. So we see in quantum physics that consciousness is affecting matter. And within cell biology, there's the field of epigenetics, where we see that the environment affects the ability of a cell to download new information from the DNA so that it can respond differently, create new proteins. to respond to environmental factors. And part of the environmental condition is our thoughts and our emotions.
Correct.
So it's not just physical. So there are so many ways where we see that science getting to a certain point kind of arrives at spirituality.
So Laila, I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is that, you help a lot of people, you teach a lot of people, you guide a lot of people. Can you share an example or a story of a transformative experience you witnessed through your support of so many others? And of course, I don't want any names.
Sure, no, of course. Yeah, so there was one woman who came to me. She had given birth to 2 children, and she was just feeling dead inside, like an empty shell, dead inside. And she didn't know if it was like a birth, postpartum depression, or what was going on. She just knew that she needed something. And this is something that is more common than we think. This feeling dead sounds like a very dramatic description, but many people feel disconnected, feel a bit numb, like I'm not fully in touch with my vibrancy, with my aliveness. But what is it, right? So it's not uncommon, but for her it had come to the point where she realized that something needs to change. And her mind was open, and so I took her to ayahuasca ceremony as her first step, because this is like a powerhouse, right? It can just blow open things. And for her, that completely and radically changed her life experience permanently. Like it's because it became the beginning of her spiritual path. It was the same thing. She was atheist before she came. And so then she started to get into meditational practices. Now she's a Reiki practitioner, and she's working to help other people to connect with their own vitality and to heal those emotional wounds. Because once we start the journey, what's often going to happen is that we open this almost like a Pandora's box of wounding that we've been stuffing down our whole life. And we have to see that. We have to go through it. And it's painful. And it's so difficult. But it's kind of like necessary, this thing that I think the Greek talked about, know thyself. We have to know all that is in here in order to accept it, and in order to move through life with more ease and grace. Correct.
And of course, in the scriptures in India, Sanatana scriptures, it's always Aham Brahman, which is I am all my answers, all my challenges lie within me. I think that's such an important part of it. But Laila, back to my conversation with you, and my last question, and this for the many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing understanding of so many of these divine practices, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
So the first one I would say is, whatever practice you choose, know that whatever tradition you're in, it doesn't matter if it's Christian or Hindu or a yogi or a tantric, but know that path is going to take you to the final goal.
Yeah.
Know that 100%, and keep a daily practice. Daily practice is essential, whatever it looks like in that tradition. And if possible, find a spiritual master. And if you don't have a spiritual master, and if you don't know how to find one, pray for one. If you have a sincere desire in your heart for a spiritual master, the spiritual master will appear. That is how it is. It is the power and the grace of the spiritual master is that they can appear at any time to anyone who is ready to meet them.
Yeah.
And lastly, I would say sincerity. If you're not sincere, you're really just lying to yourself, and that is kind of what we're trying to stop doing here, to manipulate and to.
Wonderful!
So sincerity is absolutely key.
And on that note, Laila, and your 3 powerful lessons, whatever you choose, know that the path that you choose to take will get you to your final goal. Second, you said, was find a spiritual master, and if you don't know how to find one, pray for the master, and the master will appear. And third one you said was sincerity is so critical. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about soul space and all the amazing things that you are doing as you are diving so deep to understand meditation, yoga, tantra, bhakti, and so many other aspects. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was such a joy speaking to you, and I love talking about these topics, so it's a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.